Welcome back to the Cale Clark Show, our Conclave edition, Conclave Craziness. And I'm joined by producer Lucas Holt. I was trying to come up with a catchy name. This is happening in May. I thought about May Madness, but that seems to be a little bit too close to March Madness. But we are going to have a new pope in a matter of days, Lucas. So it's going to be an exciting few days. The conclave is beginning this week on May the 7th to select the successor of Pope Francis. And Lucas, I want to wish you a happy Easter. We were on an Easter break for a couple of weeks, but it's good to be back.
Yep.
And do you have a celebratory beverage with you?
I don't. I currently just have water, but
Okay,
I did have a Diet Coke earlier today. So
okay, well you're absolved. You're absolved. And I have the Diet Coke as well. And in fact, Warren Buffett just announced this past Saturday that he is resigning from Berkshire Hathaway. He's turning things over to his deputy, who's a Canadian, by the way. And but one of the things that was interesting about his comments, and this is, I reposted this video on my Twitter feed, so you can check that out at Cale Clark, C-A-L-E, Clark with an E is my handle on X, formerly known as Twitter. And of course, Buffett he was drinking regular Coke, but he's been a big investor in Coke for a long, long time. And he and his late partner, Charlie Munger, he said, listen, Charlie and I really did not spend a whole lot of time, excessively taking care of ourselves. He drank a lot of Coke. And Buffett is 94 right now. He's still going strong. Munger also lived to a ripe old age. So I said to my wife, hey, Buffett says it's okay if I have 5 to 7 Diet Cokes a day. Well, I don't know about that many, but that's about what I've been averaging. So I'll have another one right now. Why not, in honor of Warren Buffett? All right.
There we go. Cale, I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to this episode because I was messaging you before we recorded this, and I said I know nothing about Conclave, how it happens, what it's all about. So I will be learning alongside everyone else as we go through this.
Absolutely.
I've been trying to, and I don't know if this is smart or not, but I've been trying to actually kind of distance myself a little bit from a lot of the coverage of the stuff because I'm just like, there's a certain sense in which it's good to be knowing what's going on and to pray for the conclave, to pray for the cardinals that are going to be electing the Pope, but I try not to be too speculative. But who knows?
It's hard not to be.
How it all happens. Yeah, it's hard not to be.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Lucas, because actually probably the best piece that I've read surrounding the conclave, I'm going to share this with our listeners and those who are watching on YouTube in this episode. It's kind of about that. It's how to deal with this in a more spiritual way, because we Catholics can get caught up in the news cycle just as much as anybody. And when the conclave starts, we're going to be refreshing our browsers every 5 minutes to see if there's any white smoke coming out of the Sistine Chapel. But I'm going to talk about it, maybe a spiritual way to look at this. We will. I'm going to try not to engage in speculation about who might be the next pope, who is papable, as it were. But I am wearing a red shirt today in honor of the cardinals in the conclave. And you might say, what's this? Well, I didn't spill paint on my shirt. This is actually the Philippines. And my wife's family is from the Philippines. She was born in Canada, but they brought back for me on a trip this shirt. It's a Philippine polo shirt. And you might think that I'm throwing my support behind Cardinal Tagle, Luis Antonio Tagle of the Philippines. I can't in good conscience do that. Of course, I'm jesting here. I'm jesting. If he's who God wants to be Pope, hey. I'm basing all of this off of his karaoke performance, and I also posted that on my Twitter feed as well. There's a video going around of him performing karaoke. This is a very Filipino thing, so you can't fault him for this 100% because all Filipinos love karaoke, and heck, so do I. Karaoke Cale comes out a lot on this show. But really what his main faux pas was the song choice. It was John Lennon's Imagine. Which is the worst song in the 20th century. Right. Imagine there's no heaven. Imagine there's no religion. Come on, Cardinal Tagle. You ought to have known better than that. So we'll talk about a couple of papal candidates. And I will give my personal choice. I'm going to give my choice of who I would like to be Pope. And of course, God probably has other ideas. God usually doesn't check with me about anything. But at any rate, I don't think it'd be too much of a surprise who I will pick if you're a big fan of the program, but I will be revealing that later. And I also took the trouble, so you didn't have to I watched the movie Conclave, and of course, the producers of the film very smart to put it out on video right now. Perfect timing, and I did watch it. I didn't see it in the theaters. Of course, it came out in October in theaters last year. Whether or not you think whether I think you should see the movie or not, I will reveal that as well later in the program. So lots to talk about on this particular episode of the Cale Clark Show. And I'm so thankful if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can give us a rating and review. It helps people to find the show. Really appreciate that. And also YouTube subscribers, smash that subscribe button. All right, so let me get to, first of all, Lucas, this piece that I mentioned earlier, which is the best thing I've read so far about how we should be approaching this as faithful Catholics. Bishop Eric Varden was interviewed by The Pillar. Luke Coppin of The Pillar interviewed Bishop Varden. I don't know if you've heard of him before. I don't know too much about him, but he is a Norwegian Trappist monk. He's an author, and he is a beer aficionado as well. So Trappist monks make a lot of beer. I already like him just because of this, and some of my family members keep telling me to crack open a brewski on the show, and maybe we'll do that after we have a new pope. Maybe the next episode we can celebrate a little bit. I'm gonna stick with the Diet Coke for now. I'm a little under the weather too, so I don't want to exacerbate that with the suds. But this is an amazing piece, a great interview. We're going to put the link in the show notes as well. But he had a nice way of looking at this, and I'm just going to pull this up here and quote some pieces from the article. And what ought we to be doing if we're not hitting the refresh button every 5 minutes to see if there's any white smoke coming out of the Sistine? What should we do? Well, he starts off by saying that a lot of us have kind of felt like we're part of a headless body in a certain sense over the last few days since Pope Francis passed away on April the 21st at age 88. And of course, that's not true ultimately, because Jesus Christ is the head of the church. And he is, of course, reigning over the church from heaven. He's resurrected. We just celebrated this Easter. The final victory is secure. He's in control. We need not fret. We don't need to worry about this. He's ascended into heaven. But just like the incarnation of Christ, the church is the mystical body of Christ on earth. In a sense, collectively, we extend the incarnation through time. We are his hands and feet. But right now, that mystical body doesn't have a head, doesn't have a representative on earth. So how do we react to this? We're like a headless horseman, if you will. And I just was watching a clip from Gladiator in which Russell Crowe, of course, playing Maximus, he's fighting the barbarians at the beginning of the film in that forest scene. Incredible imagery. It really calls to mind the armor of God. Of course, St. Paul gets this in Ephesians from the Roman soldiers, and the fiery darts, and they had that. They're burning this forest down. And by the way, Ridley Scott, the director, actually did burn a forest down in the UK when they were filming this scene. He got permission to do it because it was due for deforestation anyways. And I tweeted about this. I sort of reposted a tweet with a clip from the film. And he just said, listen, I will deforest the thing for you. As long as you let me burn it down and film it, I'll do it for you. And they're like, cool, go for it. So that first battle scene, and the Romans, of course, send a representative on horseback to the barbarians, say, hey, will you guys surrender? And they send the body back headless. And of course, okay, they didn't accept the offer. We're going to fight. So we kind of feel like that we're kind of adrift. We're kind of without an earthly leader. Of course, Christ is in control. But how ought we to look at this? Well, Bishop Eric Varden, this brewmeister, this Norwegian Trappist monk and author, he said that what we really have to do right now is, number one, pray. We've got to mourn. We've done this, the loss of a pope. But instead of being kind of agitated, fretting, he said we should really do the exact opposite. We have to practice silence and really tap into the peace of Christ. And this is one thing that Christ says, of course, after the resurrection, he appears to his followers. Peace be with you. Don't be afraid. And so this is one thing we should do. Focus on this fruit of the Spirit, Galatians chapter 5, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And because we are a body, he says, this is a really good time for us to think about how we can contribute to the good of the body during this interregnum period and during the conclave. How can we bring peace into the body? He said, look, go to adoration. If you can find time for adoration, do it. Find time for silent prayer and pray that we're able to receive the blessings that God wants to pour out onto the church. Really, really love that from Bishop Varden. But not just that, Lucas. He also mentions that, and this is a quote from Lumen Gentium, which is the Vatican II document, of course, on the church. Lumen Gentium in Latin, it means the light of the nations. And that's really what we're supposed to be as the church. It says this, quote, all the faithful of Christ are invited to strive for the holiness and perfection of their own proper state. Indeed, they have an obligation to so strive. Let all then have care that they guide aright their own deepest sentiments of soul. End of quote. And one of the things that we have to think about is the fact that we are all called to be saints. We're all called to, make sure that our souls are purified. And he talks about how every Catholic, in a certain sense, thinks at some level, we're called to be saints. If we know this, we've thought about the glory of that. Man, imagine if there was like a stained glass window, St. Lucas of Appleton, Wisconsin, in that church. What would my coat of arms look like? We always we think about that, but we often don't think about the price to get there, which is picking up the cross, of course. And this is what Jesus did. And Bishop Varden talks about that famous Carmen Christi, if you will, that song of Christ in Philippians chapter 2, which is probably a hymn of the early church. And when we do that, we have to sort of take on that attitude of Christ. And this is what it says in Philippians chapter 2. Though he was in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but he emptied himself. He emptied himself. And then, of course, he submits to death on a cross, a Roman execution, the worst form of capital punishment that they could come up with. Had to invent a new word for that. We talked about it on Holy Thursday. Excruciating, it means out of the cross. And that's the part that we want to become saints, but the way to get there is the way of the cross. And so we have to kind of do that. And this is a way that we can help the church by picking up the cross during this time. And anyway, so Luke Coppin asked Bishop Varden this question. He said, is it okay to pray that our favorite candidate becomes Pope? Or is that kind of like praying that your favorite sports team wins the cup? And he said, well, I don't think we should use the term winning. Nobody really wins the papacy because this is a crushing burden. And I remember when Pope Benedict, following the conclave that elected him in 2005, when he came out, he said that when he saw the votes were starting to go his way, and he did not want to be Pope. No one in their right mind would want to be Pope. That's the guy you don't want to be Pope, the person who wants to be Pope. That's actually a line in the Conclave movie as well. But he just wanted to retire, go back to Bavaria, write theology books, play the piano, hang out with his brother, who was also a priest. It just kind of live that out. But he realized that wasn't what God wanted. And he saw the votes kind of going all towards him. And he used this term, Lucas. He said, I felt the guillotine was about to fall on me. And indeed, it's like a death, an early death, if you will, because just the crushing burdens. And Bishop Varden talks about the fact that the Pope, just like all of us will have to appear at the judgment bar of Christ. And the fact that the cardinals go into the Sistine Chapel and they're making their vote while they're looking at that mural of the Last Judgment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this later in the program. Cardinal Collins actually gave an interview, friend of the program. Cardinal Collins talked about, he participated in the last conclave, what actually goes on and what happens when you're placing your vote. So just bookmark that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But just knowing that this is a crushing burden. And when you look at that mural, you see there are a lot of Michelangelo painted a lot of prelates, a lot of bishops in hell, and a lot of them were his personal enemies. And, maybe he was vindictive to do that. The faces of his enemies are bishops who are in hell. Okay. But the papacy is, your life is not your own. And that's true, really, ultimately, of all of us as baptized Catholics. We belong to Jesus Christ. But the pontiff was, and I'm just going to quote Bishop Varden here. He says, quote, "The fortitude and faith required of the Roman pontiff defy imagination. That poor man must be at once very strong and very pliable. He must be intensely present in this world's affairs, yet live an utterly supernatural life. He must practice dispossession to a heroic degree with not a moment's respite. He must consent from the depth of his heart to the Petrine call. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." And that's John 21:18. That was this Sunday's gospel. Of course, the third Sunday of Easter, the scene by the shore. The apostles are fishing in John 21. We'll talk about that too in just a moment, because I wanted to touch on the Achilles heel of the first pope, Pope Peter. And it kept coming up again and again and again. It did in this passage as well. So Bishop Eric Varden says, who can live up to this? You really need the help of Jesus Christ. And so we've got to understand that although he will have a very privileged position, of course, and a joyful one at that, the Pope's crown essentially is ultimately a crown of thorn. I don't know if the new Pope's going to bring back that triple tiara crown that the Pope used to wear, but ultimately, whatever it is, the real crown is the crown of thorns that Jesus wore. All right. Well, one of the other things that Bishop Varden said was this, in terms of this suffering that the Pope must endure. He says, quote, "Instead of considering the College of Cardinals as a stable of horses and queuing at the betting shop," with the Kentucky Derby having just taken place. And by the way, every single horse in that race was a descendant of Secretariat, the 1978 winner, who won by 35 lengths. It's not like a horse race, although many people are handicapping who's going to be the next pope. There are FanDuel odds on this for sure. But instead of queuing at the betting shop, he says, quote, "I think we should think and pray in these terms. Right now, Providence is preparing a man of God's choosing to assume a supremely privileged share in Christ's paschal oblation, to live out this intimate charge until death, in the scrutiny of a prying world whose attitude is fickle, which in a moment will turn from shouting Hosanna to hissing Crucify," end of quote. And that's certainly the truth. Very powerful image there. And the Pope has to be ready to preach the gospel in and out of season, even if people don't like it. And very often they don't.
Yeah, that's good. I really like what he's saying here, Cale, and what you've kind of been going with here, which is like the importance of adoration, of prayer, of carrying your cross, the pursuit of holiness. Because as a church, the healthier it's, just as to use the analogy that St. Paul uses in the scriptures, the healthier the members of the body are, the healthier the body overall is going to be. So
absolutely, it's
not on just, the Pope does have this kind of the supreme role, but the health of the church depends on all of us. And absolutely. One of the examples I love from history is St. Catherine of Siena. For those of you who know church history, you'll know the phrase, the Avignon papacy, which is when in the 1300s, for lack of a better word, the headquarters moved from Rome to Avignon, France, because the Pope at that time, who I don't remember what his name was, but was getting too close with the king in France. And Catherine of Siena was seeing this corruption kind of take place, and that the church and state were getting too much, too close for, they were mixing up their relations, let's just say. And she went before the Pope and convinced him to move the papacy back to Rome.
Yeah.
And she was at that time, like not necessarily a very well-known person, but she had the courage to go do that. And so just, I mean, we all have a role to play
Yeah.
in shaping the future of the church through our own pursuit of holiness. And yeah, it's but that quote that you just mentioned there at the end, I mean, that is that's true, because this is one of the times where I feel like the church gets a lot of good coverage, where it's like, like a lot of people were, even secular media, were really like doing a lot of really nice coverage on Pope Francis. And the question though is going to be, well, after they elect someone, how critical are they going to be of their leadership, or maybe they're a conservative pope or a liberal pope or whatever. They'll put these political terms on it, and then that's where things are going to get, okay, well, let's dial it down and just focus on praying for the pope and being obedient and trusting that in the end it's God's church. So
yeah, that's right. And you mentioned the Avenue on Papacy, and that's when my dog Poppy, you heard her in the background, started howling. I think she was not a fan of that rather odd moment in church history. But that's a good example to bring up, because I think that church history it's got a checkered past in a certain sense, and there have been a lot of quote unquote bad popes. One cannot say the Borgia popes were ideal, for example. The church survived that. Hard to believe as it may be. And that's one of the things that Cardinal Newman, St. John Henry Newman, who was probably the most famous Protestant in the world, I think he was, before he became Catholic, when he visited Rome, one of the things he said in the 19th century was, man, this has to be of God, the Catholic Church, because if God wasn't in it, this whole thing would have collapsed centuries ago, because it is a mess here.
Yeah,
I mean, there were corruption and problems in his time as well. And I do think that's really important, that we all have a part to play in the body. And we are not to watch the clerics of the church perform like actors on a stage. We are part of this body, and we have to be active, and also in evangelizing and to take advantage of what you said, Lucas, the fact that the eyes of the world are upon us right now, upon the church. Everyone is interested in what's going on in Rome. Everybody's talking about this, whether even President Trump suggesting that he ought to be the next pope, of course, in jest, and whether or not he should have done that. People are raging about that on the internet, whether that was in good taste or not. I don't think it necessarily was. But having said that, everybody's talking about this. The eyes of Texas, and not just the eyes of Texas, the eyes of the whole world are on the Catholic Church right now. So it's a great opportunity to evangelize. People are talking about us. And whether you're at the water cooler or talking with relatives and friends, or online even, it's a great chance to preach, and we ought to do that. All right, Lucas, I think it's time to answer the question you posed at the beginning. What actually happens at the conclave? What is it like on the inside? Well, to help us out with that, a friend of the program, and I'm just going to reveal my choice for Pope right now. It should be fairly obvious. I would love it. Well, whatever God wants, but I would really personally love it if Cardinal Thomas Collins, the former Archbishop of Toronto, he's now the Archbishop Emeritus of Toronto. There's a new Cardinal Archbishop of Toronto, Cardinal Francis Leo, who's also going to be at the conclave. He was just recently installed. So we have two cardinals in Toronto right now where I live. But Cardinal Collins, great friend of the program. He's been a guest on the show many, many times, and been a great supporter personally to me. He's always helped me whenever I put on a Faith Explained conference. He's always come to speak and celebrate Mass, and he's always been a great encourager. And I just think he's an incredible teacher. And I also think, just sidebar here, I think it would be good for the church if we had a pope who is very proficient in speaking English. I think it would be interesting, because let's face it, English is pretty much the lingua franca, if you will, of the world these days. And a pope who's fluent in English, I think, would be very, very intriguing for the world, especially in the West. Just throwing that out there. But Cardinal Collins, of course, who participated in the last conclave that elected Pope Francis, he was made a cardinal by Pope Benedict in 2012. He gave an interview to CBC News in which he talked about what actually goes on behind closed doors in the conclave. And he was asked in this interview whether or not he'd seen the Conclave movie. And he was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to watch that movie. I've lived it. I've lived the real thing. And believe me, the real thing is far more intriguing. So let's see what he has to say about this. I'm just going to share some of the quotes, and we'll put a link to this interview as well in the show notes. He said, quote, "It's a very prayerful thing, the conclave, and it's remarkable." He says, "The conclave that I went to before, there were 117 cardinal electors there. There's going to be 135 there this time. The Holy Father," and that's, of course, Pope Francis, the late Pope Francis, named a lot more cardinals. So we were just starting to meet the new cardinals bit by bit who are arriving. Oh, in Rome. I think he actually might be referring to the one that elected Francis. So these are cardinals named by Pope Benedict. At any rate, he says right now, quote, "Altogether there are 252 cardinals if you count all the cardinals over the age of 80. Now, if you're over the age of 80, you can't vote in the conclave, but you can still go to Rome, make your voice heard. Of course, the cardinals are having believe me, even though the conclave doesn't start until May the 7th, it has unofficially started now. You can bank on that. There's lots of reports online about cardinals gathering in restaurants and having talks, and that's good. That's a natural thing. They need to do that, and Cardinal Collins is going to explain this in just a second. But he said these other cardinals who are over 80, they have a right to come, but they don't have to. But it is an obligation that we have to be there. And by we, he means those who are under the age of 80. So he says, quote, "We have meetings in the morning. We begin with a prayer, and then the new cardinals, the newly arrived cardinals, take the oath of office. And then we discuss different issues like the setting up of the papal funeral." This is all before the conclave starts, when the cardinals start trickling into Rome and arriving. Then we discuss different issues like the setting up of the funeral and management type issues of organizing it. And then gradually after the papal funeral, from my experience of the last conclave, he says, that will then shift. These discussions that the cardinals are having will then shift to the current needs of the church. He says some people will come in, some external people will come in and talk to us about spiritual guidance, the different departments of the Roman government of the church, which is known as the Curia. And they'll explain what their needs are. And then the cardinals will start expressing what we feel, he says, we need. And so it's a very prayerful thing, he says, quote, "We begin with a prayer, we end with prayer, and then we have these coffee breaks halfway through our meetings. They're very important because this is when the cardinals get to talk to one another, get to know one another a bit more. So it's very, very useful. But once the conclave is called, and that's the sort of the stage we're at now, Cardinal Collins says we all disperse to the various churches in Rome. So when you're named a cardinal, you're given a titular church in Rome or its vicinity that you're sort of the cardinal of this particular church. So Cardinal Collins is the cardinal priest of St. Patrick's Church. So what happens is all the cardinals go to their titular churches, if you will. They're essentially honorary clergy of Rome. They celebrate Mass, pray with the people there, and then they go into the conclave. And of course, all the cardinals, Lucas, stay at the St. Martha Hotel, the Casa Santa Marta, which is famously where Pope Francis decided to keep living after he was elected Pope. He stayed there. He never moved into the papal apartment and sort of had the insides redone. I think they made some upgrades to his room, but he stayed in a very simple room in the St. Martha Hotel. And what's that like? Well, Cardinal Collins says it's kind of like going to an airport. He says, quote, "You go through a metal detector, you have yourself scanned, and then you go in, they take you up to your room, and then they cut a seal that's on the door. You go in, and the rooms are used usually by priests who come to the Vatican to do some work when there's not a conclave, but of course the rooms are meant for the conclave." And he says the slots, and I think by that he means the blinds on the windows, are all shut. The telephone wires are cut. The TV is cut. They have jamming devices on the roof. So you are really, really isolated. You're not going to be binge watching, the latest season of Top Chef, as you have some spare time at the conclave. You're not going to be doing that. You're going to be praying and thinking about it. And this is what he says. He says, quote, "It gives you the freedom to think without pressure." And that's what it means. The conclave, it means conclave, or with the key. They lock you in. And in a way, it's probably pretty refreshing, Lucas, I think, just to have that time which they would need without the outside pressures to what they feel God's telling them that the church needs right now. So that's kind of what's going on there.
That's interesting. I didn't know the word conclave was meant with the key. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that makes sense too, just given like the keys of Peter and obviously the symbolism there. But yeah, it's interesting. Well, you know, I don't know if Cardinal Collins, the one time I remember Cale when he was on the show not long ago, he seems like the type of person that would not want that job to be the Pope. But
No.
I will give you my personal choice as well. Because technically you don't have to be a cardinal to be the Pope. So
that's
it can be any,
just have to be a baptized male.
Baptized male Catholic. So Cale, I choose you.
Oh, that's a terrible choice. Believe me, that is not happening.
Yeah.
I appreciate the vote. Maybe you could write a write-in ballot. I don't think they're going to accept it, Lucas. But
I'll send a note to
no. Oh, no way, man. I like I said before, nobody in their right mind, even if I was a priest, bishop, or cardinal, which I'm not, would want that job. And Cardinal Collins is no exception there. Well, how do they actually vote? That's a really good question to ask. And he says that before the conclave starts, the cardinals are all kind of going out for dinner, and they do talk about this. They do say, you know, who do you think would be a good pope? You know, what do we really need right now? And everybody kind of gives their personal view. And he says, but once you get in there, once you're actually in the conclave and you start voting, nobody sort of nominates anybody. I hereby nominate Cardinal so-and-so. I think we should all vote for this guy. That is not talked about in the conclave. That sort of stuff all happens beforehand during their informal get-togethers. So what happens when they actually start to vote, he says, quote, you just take the first ballot, everyone votes on a little card that says, I choose for Pope, and then there's a line. You put in the name. And this is in the movie too, by the way. And I think probably, not that I've been in a conclave because I haven't, but it seems like they did a pretty good job, based on what Cardinal Collins is saying, of depicting how the cardinals vote in conclave. And he says, quote, you write the name and then you go up to the front, you look up at the Last Judgment by Michelangelo with all kinds of cardinals and popes going to hell, and you say, I promise that the one that I'm voting for is the one I truly believe in the sight of God should be the Pope. Then you drop your ballot into the silver kind of a bowl, he says, and once they're done the countdown, they want to make sure they've got the right number. They read out the names, and they'll say, Cardinal so-and-so, 19 votes, or whatever the case may be. And then each one of the cardinals there has a list that they can check off. Check, 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 as the names are called, he says. And he writes, quote, we're all like scrutineers, and every time a ballot is read out, it's put on a little string so we don't get them mixed up. And this is in the movie as well. There's almost like a gigantic needle and thread, the scarlet thread, and they sort of string the ballots out, almost like on a clothesline, if you will, so they don't get mixed up. And of course, you need a 2/3 majority of cardinals to vote for the same guy, for that man to be Pope. And if they don't get that number, you know what happens, Lucas. What do?
It's the black smoke.
They burn them. Yeah, that's right. They burn the ballots in a little oven that's at the other end of the Sistine Chapel, and then the famous black smoke goes up that the vote was not successful. And they put a little additive in the with the ballots to make the smoke turn black, and that's how they do that. And so that's the first ballot. And then Cardinal Collins says the first ballot is generally a nominating ballot. You might get a lot of people in that first ballot. A lot of names might come up. Some cardinals get 1 vote, 2 votes, 3 votes. Some will get 10 votes. Some will get 20. Some will get 30 votes. And then what they do is they take a break, they go back, they pray, they think, and then they have dinner. And then the next day, he says, we come back. By that time, people have chatted again about, okay, who looks like they're kind of, you know, there's usually by that point 5 or 6 cardinals, he says, who are getting double-digit voting. So then you kind of know, okay, these are sort of the front runners, if you will. And then he says, by the time they have the next ballot, the ones that only had 1 or 2 votes tend to drop off the ballot. And then the numbers start to accumulate towards just a few cardinals. And they kind of start, racking up the votes. And then they have another ballot and then another. And then, of course, they stop as soon as one of the numbers goes over 2/3. And when that happens, when they have a pope, if you will, he has to accept that. The cardinal who they vote in as pope has to accept that. And this is depicted in the film as well. The chief cardinal says to the winner, quote unquote, if you, depending on how you look at this, do you accept your nomination as supreme pontiff? And if the cardinal says yes, that's when he actually becomes the pope. And then what happens? He chooses a name. By what name would you like to be known? And obviously, in the case of Cardinal Bergoglio, he chose for the first time ever the name Francis. No pope had ever been named Francis, of course, harkening back to St. Francis of Assisi. So after he picks the papal name, the new pope will go into a special room known as the Room of Tears, because again, just the weight of the office, and that's where you, the new pope will get vested. Dressed in white, he'll get the papal cassock, and they have various sizes there. This is depicted in the film as well. There's a whole sort of a rack of white cassocks. Some are short, some are tall, some are fat, some are skinny, depending on the physical characteristics of the pope. They'll try to get it as right as they can. It's like the Masters. It's like the green jacket.
I always wondered that.
Yeah, that's how they do it. That's how they do it.
I always wondered that because I was like, because if they don't know who's going to be the pope, like how do they turn around a white cassock that quickly to make sure it fits? They just prepare them already.
Yeah, I think they just prepare them.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Cale, I did a quick math on the calculator here, and 2/3. You said 2/3 has to be 2/3 of the cardinals vote for a person for them to be elected to the papacy. 2/3 of 135 is 90.
That's right.
So there has to be 90 cardinals all vote for the same person. That's a lot of people. I mean, Yeah,
and throughout the history of the conclaves, if you read the history, there have been some conclaves that have gone on for weeks and stretching even into months. And in fact, there's been some rare situations where cardinals have even died during the process because it took so long, and thereby disqualifying themselves from the papacy. And there's been other times when they actually cut off the food supply for the cardinals. They just started, okay, you're not getting fed again until you pick somebody. So this is taking too long. But generally speaking, that has not happened in a very, very long time, probably hundreds of years. And the last few papal elections, it's been, I don't know what the number is, but maybe 4 or 5 ballots or so. I think it took a couple days, if memory serves, to elect Francis. But at any rate, it shouldn't take that long. But maybe it will. We'll see. We'll see. And so anyway, so they give the new pope the cassock. He comes out on the balcony, dressed in white, have him as papam. We have a pope, the white smoke. Everybody's cheering. Everybody, and then all the other cardinals, they of course will congratulate him. And then before he goes out to the balcony and blesses the world, the Urbi et Orbi blessing, if you will. And so that's the process. That's what happens in the conclave, according to Cardinal Collins, and he would know because he was there. So. Will he be the Pope? I don't know.
That's really interesting.
A name that you've probably seen as well, Lucas, that's been, and again, it's pure speculation. We don't know. I mean, it's not like there's an Adam Schefter of the Vatican, an insider that's talking to these guys and knows exactly what's happening. Although, unfortunately, as you well know, Lucas, our cardinals have leaked stuff out of the conclave in the past. They take a solemn vow that they will not talk about anything that happened in the conclave, but there have been leaks in the past, and anonymous leaks to the press. And allegedly, if these leaks are to be believed, allegedly that when Benedict was elected Pope, apparently Cardinal Bergoglio, who became the next Pope, obviously Pope Francis, apparently he finished second to Benedict in that conclave. And apparently there was kind of a deadlock, but one of the cardinals got up and said, I think it might have been Cardinal Schönborn, if memory serves me correctly, according to these leaks, guys, just come on, Benedict deserves this. He's in line with JP2, he should be our guy right now. And so eventually the deadlock was broken, and on the votes that went to Bergoglio, went over to Benedict, getting him over or some of the votes did enough to get him over the 2/3. But then, of course, obviously, Bergoglio did win the next conclave. And I don't know who finished second at that time, but we'll see. We'll see. And there might be a Canadian Pope. I don't know.
That would be interesting. That
President Trump probably won't invade Canada if we have a Canadian Pope. I don't know. I'm just kidding, but that'll be. We'll see. We'll see who is chosen. And by the way, speaking of Pope Benedict, one thing that he has always said was that don't think that if somebody becomes Pope, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Holy Spirit wants that person to become Pope. Because you have to think about this. Remember the Borgia popes, there have been some very quote unquote bad popes throughout history. Are we saying that God chose the Borgia popes? Obviously not. He says that the Holy Spirit gives the cardinal electors all the wisdom and spiritual resources that they need to make the right choice, to seek God's will. But ultimately, they are making a choice. There is human freedom involved as well. But he says that what God guarantees is that the whole thing will not get so messed up. It won't go off the rails to the point where the church will be destroyed. God will not allow that to happen. But so that's an important thing to remember when we think about who is chosen as Pope and who has been chosen as Pope in the past. There is a human element to the decision making as well. It's very, very important to note.
Yeah.
So another name that's been bandied about a lot in the media is Cardinal Pierbattista Pizzaballa from the Holy Land. And of course, if he is Pope, one of the funnest things will happen will be the papal memes. And there's already been a few that have gone out, a couple of them, which I found pretty funny. If he does win, he's elected Pope. Pope Pizzaballa will immediately make pineapple on pizza a mortal sin. I actually don't agree with that. I like pineapple pizza. And I've seen some chefs, we're way off track right now. I've seen some chefs on TV say, this is actually really good because you've got the sweet and the savory together as a chef. That's kind of what you're looking for. It's a nice flavor profile there. But and Lucas, I can't resist one more meme that I saw, which was simply this. If Pope Pizzaballa is not elected within 30 minutes of the conclave starting, the second Pope is free. All right. Okay. That's enough. That's enough. But it is a serious, he's a serious candidate and with good reason. And you were going to share something about him that you found impressive as well, Lucas.
Yeah, Cale, I just, one of the things that, I've been seeing these memes kind of circulating as well, and people kind of making jokes about Pope Pizza and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I really like about him is that, and this really stuck out to me about a year and a half ago, when the kind of Israel-Hamas war was underway, and I remember kind of at the early stages of that, he offered himself as pretty much as a ransom for hostages that were taken.
Yeah.
And to me, whoever you are, if you're willing to lay down, a shepherd that's willing to lay down his life for the sheep is a tremendous quality to have and something that you would want. And I just think, to me, that's just really inspiring. And then not even just for the papacy, but any priest, any even husband, a willingness to lay down your life for your family, that kind of sacrificial disposition. It's really kind of inspiring. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so true that love is sacrifice and love is deeds. Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei, that he said one time that he was giving communion to a group of nuns, and in his folly, and he told the story on himself. He was saying to himself as he was giving communion to these nuns, as he gave each one the host, he said, "Lord, I thank you that I love you more than this one. I thank you that I love you more than that one." And then he had this locution. The Lord spoke to him and said, "Love is deeds, not sweet words." And it's true. And that's something that the first Pope had to learn as well. And this gospel from this past Sunday, it's very appropriate, very providential that this was the gospel on the Sunday before the conclave begins. And this is from John chapter 21, that famous fishing scene. I'm just going to read it really quickly here, Lucas. It says, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, have you any fish? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in for the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. And of course, that's John, the beloved disciple. He always recognizes first. And he says to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his clothes, for he was stripped for work, and sprang into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish lying on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. I just want to stop here for 1 second because someone tweeted at me today, because I was talking about the papacy and the conclave. Someone tweeted at me saying, hey, well, don't worry about this because the papacy isn't real and it's clearly not in the Bible. I beg to differ, and we can talk more about the papacy and the scriptures another time. But this is one passage that I think is very clear on the papacy, because when everyone has speculated about what this number means, by the way, 153 large fish in the net. And there have been all kinds of different interpretations. If you read the commentaries, from zoological interpretations to numerological interpretations, some people said that there were 153 known people groups in the world at that time, or 153 nations. Some say there were 153 types of known fish in the world at that time. But no matter what people are saying, the number, well, first of all, I think it's an actual historical reminiscence, number one. It's a historical data point. There are actually 153 fish. But what does it mean at a deeper level? It means a totality. It means a universal catch. If there's 153 different types of fish, we've got them all. If there's 153 people groups, we've got them all, because the Catholic Church, that's what the word Catholic means. It's universal. It's for everyone. So it's interesting because the other disciples, there's so many fish, they can't even all together deal with this net full of fish. Yet Peter just grabs it all by himself, drags the net full of fish, and the net is not torn. So what does that mean? It means Peter is leading this universal church, this universal catch, the unity of the net, the unity of the church. The net is not torn, and it's a total, complete, universal catch. If that doesn't speak to the leadership of Peter, I don't know what does. And there are other scholars, and maybe you've heard this before too, Lucas, speculate that there were different communities in the early church. Like there's a Johannine community that were sort of, John was their leader, and there's a Petrine community over here, and there are Pauline churches. I think that is a bit overdone, if not completely overdone. The church is united around the apostles, and especially Peter as head of the 12. But even if there is a Johannine community, let's say that that's true. Well, in John's gospel itself, it's clearly presenting Peter as the leader, even in John's own literature here. At any rate, so that's just a little data point on the papacy there in this passage. But what I really want to focus on is what happens next. And it's so famous. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. A second time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you girded yourself and walked where you would. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish to go. This he said to show by what death he was to glorify God. And after this he said to him, follow me. Now, what's so beautiful about this, of course, is and I'm not wiping my nose because I'm crying, although it is quite poignant, Lucas. I'm a little under the weather, but that you can imagine probably Peter wanted to cry when this happened, especially the third time he asked him that question. And and if your local parish priest or deacon or bishop preached and mentioned this, full marks to him. It's really interesting. This is unmistakably a reference to Peter's threefold denial, obviously, Lucas, in the courtyard of the high priest, saying, I don't know. And not only did he say, I don't know Jesus, he actually called down an oath on himself. He basically swore to God, I swear to God, I don't know this blankety blank so-and-so Jesus. He basically cursed him out. And where did this happen? Well, there's only 2 times in the New Testament that it uses the Greek term for a charcoal fire. And guess where they are? When Peter denies Jesus, warming himself over a charcoal fire on that cold night. And the charcoal fire is mentioned once again, very specifically in John chapter 21, where they have this meal. Jesus is cooking the fish. The imagery is unmistakable. If there's a threefold denial, there has to be a threefold restoration. And then this whole idea of, someone else will tie a belt around you and lead you where you do not want to go. Of course, the one who's doing the leading ultimately is God, the Holy Spirit. And this is a reference to Peter being led to his martyrdom. And Bishop Barron, and by the way, I encourage everybody to listen to Bishop Barron's Sunday Sermons podcast. They're really great. And the one he did for this particular gospel, he talked about really when you look at Peter's life, and Lucas, I don't know about you, but Peter's definitely my favorite of the 12. And I think for most of us, we can identify with Peter. I mean, there might be a few Thaddeus fans out there, right? But most people, if you ask them, who's your favorite apostle? They'll say probably Peter. Because despite the great glory and responsibility that he was given, he is a very weak man. G.K. Chesterton said that, why did God choose Peter as one of the 12? Why didn't he choose the mystic John? Why didn't he choose somebody who was, a fighter like Simon the Zealot? He chose Peter, who was a coward. He was weak. He had all these flaws. The braggadocio, it would all come tumbling down. And G.K. Chesterton said a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, because the power ultimately comes from Christ. And once he was restored, he was different after that. But Bishop Barron said in his homily, if you look at these key moments in Peter's life, it all boils down to one thing. It's a failure to accept the cross. Caesarea Philippi, he correctly identifies, with God's help, who Jesus is. Who do you say that I am? Well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Yeah, you got it, Peter. Ding, ding, ding. And then immediately after Peter gets this, then I say to you, you are Peter, you're the rock on which I'm going to build my church. Great. But then Peter immediately steps in it. He says, no. Jesus starts talking about, I have to go to the cross. I'm going to be mocked. I'm going to be spit upon. I'm going to be flogged. I'm going to be beaten. I will be killed. 3 days later, I'll rise. No. This can never happen to you. And then Jesus rebukes him and says, get behind me, Satan. And it doesn't mean, he's not saying he's the devil. Satan is it's actually a Persian loan word into Hebrew. We apply it to, of course, the devil, but it actually means adversary or opponent. Like you are opposing God. You're not with me. You're against me when you're thinking this way. And if you think about other times when he messes up, the foot washing, you will never wash my feet. He's always telling Jesus what to do. We talked about the foot washing in our last episode before Easter. All this sort of stuff. And then another one that Bishop Barron brought up, of course, is in Luke's gospel. And this one I had not heard before. This is an interesting, a great interpretation. He said that in Luke's gospel, Jesus says to Peter, he says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. Not just him, but all the apostles as well. But I prayed for you. And that your faith would not fail, and after you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. strengthen. So he foresees, there will be a fall. He knows this, and you're going to turn back. You're going to repent. You're going to come back. But this whole idea of you're going to be sifted as wheat, Satan has demanded to sift you as wheat. That's a biblical image of the harvest. John the Baptist talked about this as well. He'll separate the wheat from the chaff, the Messiah, and this image of the harvester, just with that rake, that fork-like rake, just throwing the wheat up in the air, and then the wind blows away the chaff, and the wheat remains. That's the good stuff. But in a sense, Satan's kind of doing the opposite, as Bishop Barron explained. When Satan kind of sifts us, and he wants to do this all the time, he wants to sift so that the chaff, everything that's bad in us, everything that's not of God, he wants the chaff to remain, and he wants the wheat to be blown away. So that Satan just wants to isolate the bad qualities in us and keep them there. And that was what he was trying to do with Peter, and that's what he tries to do with us as well. And Bishop Barron says, when does this happen to us? It's usually in a crisis, when we're going through a crisis, when we're going through a difficult period, when we're going through a heartbreak, when we're going through this idea of carrying the cross. That's when we're very vulnerable to this as well. And so I thought that was very good that he mentions this. And then just one more thing. I don't want to belabor this, Lucas, but he also mentioned that before the scene at the charcoal fire on the shoreline after the resurrection, Peter's working out. Maybe it's hot. He's not wearing any clothes. He's in the boat. And then when John says it's the Lord, Peter clothes himself. He puts on his clothes, and then he dives into the water. Well, you think, okay, you'd swim first and then change, but why is he doing that? And he said, really, if you think about it, who else was naked and had to clothe himself? Adam. Because when Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, what did they do? The first thing, they didn't even know they were naked. They clothed themselves. They made fig leaf aprons for themselves. This is the original Fruit of the Loom underwear. And God says, what are you wearing this for? It's ridiculous. But who told you were naked? They didn't even know they were naked, but they were now covered in, they were shamed because of their sin. And Peter feels shame because of what he did. And that's maybe an interesting theological point too. Maybe that's partially why I got to throw something on here, because I don't feel worthy to stand before the Lord. But of course, Jesus forgives him. And it was an interesting theological point there. So the first pope had to deal with it. We are all weak, and we need the strength of God. And the next pope will need it as well. And we need to pray for him, whoever he may be, and the cardinal electors as they're selecting that pope.
Yeah. Wow. Well, St. Peter, pray for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, just before we go, I do want to answer the question that maybe a burning question on the minds of a lot of people. Should you see the movie Conclave? Well, if you want to see it, see it. I'm not the holy office when it comes to which books or movies you can read or not read. But I would say this. I gave it maybe like 1.5 stars. The only reason I watched it, I wasn't going to watch it either. I was like in Cardinal Collins' boat. He's like, I'm not watching this movie. I lived the Conclave. But the only reason I actually decided to watch it was because I have a friend who I highly respect, who is a very, very serious Catholic, and he's a huge film buff. And I asked him, hey, you didn't see Conclave, did you? And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, is it worth watching? He said, yeah, you should definitely watch it. So I watched it based on his recommendation, and he usually never steers me wrong when it comes to movies. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but that's the only reason I watched it. And I got to say, I think he was wrong. I thought it was a dud. Some great acting performances, I'll say that. I mean, it's got an all-star cast. Ralph Fiennes plays the chief cardinal who's kind of in charge of the conclave. But some heavy hitters. Stanley Tucci plays Cardinal Bellini, who's kind of the liberal candidate, if you will. And a big part of the movie, Lucas, is trying to project political realities onto the church. And I don't even like it when people say, who's liberal, who's conservative. I know what they mean when they say that, but probably the better question to ask is who's orthodox and who's heretical? Who is thinking with the teaching of the church and who is trying to depart from that? So Stanley Tucci's character, Cardinal Bellini, is the quote-unquote ultra-liberal pope who wants to change the teaching of the church. Sergio Castellitto plays Cardinal Tedesco, who is an Italian cardinal, and he's the conservative guy. But they really go to great pains to make the quote unquote conservatives look like jerks in the movie. And the liberal guys are heroes. Just be prepared for that. There's a Canadian cardinal in the film. There are Canadian cardinals in the Conclave as well. This is a fault. This is in the magical world of movies. Here, it's Cardinal Tremblay, the Canadian Cardinal Tremblay, who's played by John Lithgow. He gets into some unfortunate stuff. I don't want to spoil the movie for you in case you decide to watch it. There's an African cardinal who's also papable, Cardinal Adeyemi. And there's a wild card that shows up. Cardinal Benitez just shows up at the conclave, and they don't even know that he's a cardinal. He's the Cardinal Archbishop of Kabul, Afghanistan, who was in the film. He is made a cardinal in pectore. Now, you know what that means, Lucas? You've heard of this before, right? This is a real thing. The popes can name secret cardinals, and they're cardinals in pectore, which means cardinals in the heart. In other words, the pope knows who they are, and the pope has probably told them, I'm making you a cardinal, but it hasn't been made public. It hasn't been publicly announced because maybe that person is in danger. And there are, by the way, in the world right now, probably some cardinals that we don't know are actually cardinals because they're in a hostile political environment or their lives are in danger. Persecution against the church in different parts of the world. So in the film, this guy shows up and says, oh, by the way, I'm here for the conclave. Who are you? I'm the Cardinal of Kabul. And they're like, what? Yeah, the Pope named me in pectore. And they're like, is this legit? And they have to kind of check this out. Well, Cardinal Collins says in his interview, by the way, he said that actually would never happen in real life. The cardinal has to be like publicly known before he can be admitted to vote into the conclave. So that's just a movie thing. But, and I won't tell you who becomes Pope, but I will say this. It's kind of, they caricature, almost everybody is a caricature in this film. The sort of mystery of the film isn't even that great of a mystery. There is I'm not going to spoil it, but there is a totally unnecessary and ridiculous plot twist at the end, which is it just kind of ruins everything, and it's totally unnecessary. I'll let the watchers decide what happens there. But anyways, I don't rate this movie highly, Lucas. I'll say that.
I'm glad you spared us by watching it yourself.
Yeah, there you go. I watched it so you didn't have to. But
it kind of, when I first saw some of the advertisements for it, it made me think of a few years ago. I want to say this was like right around when COVID first happened. There was that movie, The Two Popes.
Yep. And, I didn't see that one either.
I did watch it, and it was not good. It was not good. It's just complete caricatures, and it was the kind of, they drew like, here's the conservative, here's the liberal, and it was just, it was not good.
It was Jonathan Pryce who played Pope Francis, essentially, and Anthony Hopkins plays Pope Benedict, right, in that movie.
Yeah. I mean, the acting was really good. The acting
I'm sure
was
it was,
good.
And there's great acting in this one, too.
Yeah.
Ralph Fiennes, incredible acting job in this movie. The other guys, I mean, there's some heavy hitters. The acting, I mean, it was okay. By the way, Isabella Rossellini is also in this movie as well. She plays a nun who figures prominently in the film as well. But so some real heavy hitters. I also sort of thought we'd see more of Rome in the film, like more lavish scenes from the Eternal City. Really didn't see that, actually. There wasn't a whole lot there. But at any rate, that's I did see it. I kind of wish I hadn't, but the real thing, as Cardinal Collins says, is going to be the real thing. It's going to be way more exciting, and we will have an actual pope. We're going to have a pope at some point, and the conclave, of course, starts this week, May the 7th. So please pray for them, as I know you're doing. And speaking of Rome, by the way, Lucas, if any of our listeners would like to join us on a pilgrimage to the Eternal City for the Jubilee year, of course, and it's not just Rome. It's a 3-for-1 pilgrimage, 3 for the price of 1. We're going to Rome, we're going to Lourdes, and we're going to Fatima in November 3 to 12. So go to canterburypilgrimages.com/Cale. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And you can sign up for a pilgrimage. I can't wait. And we will, Lord willing, be seeing the new Pope. at a papal audience. That's part of the journey. So I'm pretty excited about what God's going to be doing in the church over these next few months.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that is it for the show. Once again, subscribe to the show on YouTube. You can sign up for the newsletter. Go to caleclark.com, C-A-L-E, Clark with an E.com. Send out a newsletter with every episode. You're going to want to get in on that. Sign up for the pilgrimage as well. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we're glad that you are on the journey with us. Won't you give us a rating and a review for those services? Well, it really does help other listeners to find us. And of course, you can use the share features to tell family and friends about the program as well. So for producer Lucas Holt, this is Cale Clark for our Conclave Craziness edition of the Cale Clark Show. It's an exciting time to be in the church and to be a Catholic. God bless you. We'll see you in the next one.